So let's get to your top story, and that's the Supreme Court on Thursday struck down affirmative action in college admissions, declaring the race cannot be a factor and forcing the institutions of higher education to look for new ways to achieve diverse student bodies.
And Divya, this comes as a big blow to this decades-old practice that really was a boost for educational opportunities for African Americans and other minorities. Now, the court's conservative majority overturned admissions plans at Harvard and University of North Carolina, which are the nation's oldest private and public colleges. Now, what is the reason? The Chief Justice John Roberts wrote in the majority opinion that while affirmative action was well-intentioned and implemented in good faith, it cannot last forever and it amounted to unconstitutional discrimination against others. He said that the student must be treated based on his or her experiences as individuals and not on the basis of race.
Many reactions coming in. In fact, former President Donald Trump, the current presidential frontrunner, has taken to social media to react, saying that this was a decision and it has been a great day for America, people with extraordinary ability and everything else necessary for success, including future greatness for our country, are finally being rewarded. So, you know, their reactions. So we have Donald Trump on one hand totally seconding that decision that's come about, but totally contradictory to what President Biden thinks.
Absolutely. The Biden administration is strongly disagreeing. President Biden said that he strongly disagrees with this decision. Even the former President Barack Obama has said in a statement that affirmative action actually allowed generations of students like Michelle Obama and himself to prove that we belonged. So those are the major reactions coming in. And let's really understand what this means from prominent voices who are now joining us on the broadcast. We have Nish Acharya, an advisor to the Biden administration and former Director of Innovation and Entrepreneurship for President Obama, joining us. Along with that, we have Rick Mehta, an entrepreneur and adjunct professor of law at the Georgetown University Law Center and a former nominee for the U.S. Senate. Along with that, we have Vijay Engam, who is an affirmative action opponent and who's a strong supporter of students for fair admissions in their case against Harvard and UNC. We also have Anand Ahuja, attorney at Law New York, which is a New York-based who's a New York-based attorney. We also have Raj Putoria, a youth political advocate. Let me first start with you, Nish Acharya. So essentially, the court is saying that you can't consider somebody's race, somebody's ethnicity when you grant admissions. What does this mean for minorities who might be aspiring to study in the United States?
Well, I think it's a very bad decision. And I think if you look at the history of our community as Indian Americans, we were the beneficiary of this from start to finish. So in just 60 years ago, until 1965, there was no immigration from non-European countries. And the passage of the Civil Rights Act and affirmative action rules allowed for that to happen. And now there's 5 million Indian Americans in the United States, and we're the most successful minority community there is. So we have benefited from this. And so if you believe in a society where diversity is important to organizations and you believe in paying it forward, this is affirmative action is an important policy to have. So what this will do is it will in fact restrict probably international students who cannot afford to pay full tuition out of pocket. So the wealthier Indian students, for example, who want to come will still have an opportunity, but those requiring scholarships now will find a lesser opportunity for their diverse mix of talents to be reflected. And those who say that it's just because of their STEM studying or engineering, that's not the way the admissions process works. It's much more diverse. And the other quick thing I'll mention is, people say that this would be good for Indian American students, but in fact, there's no evidence that any Indian Americans were harmed because of affirmative action. The numbers who wanted to go to college have all gone to college. Maybe not their first choice, but almost all of them have gone. So certainly some elite colleges may see a spike in Indian American students, but there's no evidence that Indian Americans have been denied the opportunity to go to college simply because of affirmative action.
Right. Let's also, go across to Anand Ahuja. How did colleges use affirmative action in admissions before? Was there any formalized quota that was set aside for people belonging to different races?
Yes. First of all, I would like to make a comment on what just now your panelists mentioned. that Indians are not going to Indians are going to be adversely affected. If you see both these cases, the case concerning Harvard University's admission policy, it basically is based upon anti-Asian American students' policies. It was pro-black students and it was anti-Asian Americans. And if I'm not mistaken, we Indians very much fall under the category of Asian Americans. We don't fall under the category of Caucasian Americans. So saying that Indians were not adversely affected, in fact, both the cases, the case of University of North Carolina deals both discrimination against white Americans and Asian Americans, and case relating to Harvard University exclusively deals of discrimination against Asian American students. So under the current policy, what was going on, that at the time of admission, first of all, it's admission related. The case is relating to purely admission. Case is not related to any financial aid or scholarship or anything. So today's decision relates only and only to the extent of admission into the colleges. Now the question is, if you see Indian Americans, basically they are very bright students. If you see their grades, most of the time you'll see Indian students here in this country, they are amongst the toppers. If you see spelling bee and those kind of competitions, Indian students invariably win those competitions. Still, when it comes to admission into a college is concerned, especially I'm talking of Harvard University, then blacks were getting priority over Indian American students. So I personally believe it's a very good case as far as Indian American students are concerned. Otherwise also, I personally believe for blacks also, it's a good case in the sense because otherwise it was killing the spirit of competitiveness amongst black students because they were taking it for granted that, okay, we don't have to compete. So if you don't have that spirit of competition, then in the long run, you are a loser. You may be a gainer in the short run because you are getting an opportunity to enter into a school or college. The other important thing is in any professional institution, say for example in a medical school, the admission should be based upon merit of a student, not based on race or caste of a person. Like in India also, we have the policy, reservation policy, where whether you deserve or not, when you come from a particular quota, you come from a particular caste, so that means you will get priority over a person of the upper caste. Doesn't matter.
You are welcoming this order by the Supreme Court, and let's just get a counter opinion on this. And in fact, that's what most voices supporting this have said, that people who deserve to get admissions and people who have the merit for it should get these admissions. But Vijay Ingam, you're also an opponent of affirmative action. So while we say that people who have the merit and who have the academics to support to get their admissions, on the other side, a point that Michelle Obama also made in a statement, that people coming in from minorities, they don't have the same privileges as people coming from the majority ethnic communities do. So how do we internalize that? Because then it's not really a fair level playing field, is it?
So when I was an undergraduate at the University of Chicago, I met this constitutional law professor by the name of Barack Obama. And I remember looking at the guy and saying, if this guy, this light-skinned guy, can call himself black and benefit from affirmative action, then why can't I? So I, of course, applied to medical school as an African American, shaved my head, I trimmed my long Indian eyelashes, and I got into medical school despite the fact that my 3.1 GPA was dramatically lower than their average of 3.7 at the time. Now, my friend Edward Bloom at Students for Fair Admission showed that under similar category statistics, an African American with similar grades and test scores had about a 75% chance of admission to Harvard, whereas an Asian American had a like 25% chance. That was the statistical data he got from Harvard University based on his analysis. So I want to make it clear to all of you there and the entire population of India that affirmative action is discrimination against Asian Americans, and I'm living proof of that. I'm living proof that that exists.
So you're
That's
saying
massive
you
discrimination
posed to
against
be a
Asians.
black man to get admission?
Absolutely. I posed as a black man. I wrote a book called Almost Black, which tells the story of how I posed as a black man to gain admission to medical school, despite the fact that my grades and test scores did not meet those standards while I was an undergraduate student at the University of Chicago. It makes a huge difference. And the funny part is, until this ruling, you could pull the same scam today and it would probably work. So don't let anyone tell you that affirmative action is not discrimination against Asian Americans. Now, people talk about what is going to happen now that affirmative action is ended. Well, after I dropped out of medical school, I got my MBA at UCLA, which I'm proudly wearing my UCLA shirt today, where I learned that a school that doesn't practice affirmative action in admissions. And I'm proud to say that I got in based on merit. And I learned that it was possible to have a diverse class of African Americans, Asian Americans, Hispanics, and whites, and a rich educational experience without practicing racial discrimination in the form of affirmative action. So don't let anybody tell you that affirmative action is essential for a good education.
Right. Let's take our next question.
Regarding the issue of economic equity you brought up, affirmative action benefits based on what box you check, not your socioeconomic background.
Right.
Okay, so let's ask Rick Mehta now. Has race been a criterion for admission in all colleges so far? Isn't it that universities in California and Florida have already banned race as a factor?
Well, look at the facts of the case, right? And I agree with my colleagues who mentioned that Asian Americans were heavily discriminated. What I think we need to understand in what's happening in this country is the complete antithesis of the 1964 Civil Rights Act that talked about creating equality. Remember, in the history of our country, we had segregation, then separation, separate but equal, and then we were moving towards more of an equal, race-neutral, rather than being a race-conscious country. And what's happening with affirmative action is that it's moving the country backward, where now races are being pitted against each other. Keep in mind, Asian Americans are the minority of the minority, right? When you talk about majority minority, you're talking about African Americans, Hispanic Americans, and we know that Asian Americans are still the minority of the minority and are being discriminated, right? We also know that the Biden administration has never looked favorably among Indian Americans. I mean, Joe Biden himself has made so many discriminatory racist comments against Indian Americans throughout the history. So it's no surprise that he's unhappy with today's ruling that puts all minorities to be treated equally and all Americans to be treated equally under the law. And so it's quite bizarre, the kind of reactions that are coming out, where we're trying to move our country to be race neutral, where we're trying to make sure that our children have the same advantages, and that we're looking beyond the color of our skin. If you look at literally the facts of the case, you see that under personality ratings, that Harvard and UNC continuously rated Asian Americans lower, meaning they had poorer personality traits, in order to compensate for the lower academic performances of other demographic and minority groups. And so we've become a race-conscious country, and that actually is a very difficult premise for us to be able to move forward, especially for our children, where we want to teach our children not to see people's color of their skin.
Rick Mehta, let me just quickly get this clarity from you. This case concerned admissions at the University of Howard and University of North Carolina. So does this mean, the Supreme Court ruling means this will apply to all universities across the United States?
Yeah, all public universities across the United States, exactly.
But there were certain universities, about 9 states had already banned this ruling. Is that right, Rick?
I don't know what other states have done. All I can know is that this is the law of the land now. If the Supreme Court makes a decision, public universities cannot use race as the basis of admissions, which they were so frequently doing. Now, keep in mind, this is very important. This is a reversal of the previous decision of 2003, of which even a liberal justice in 2003, Sandra Day O'Connor, had already said that this case was going to be timestamped, that they were very concerned about affirmative action, and that 25 years from now, meaning 2028, should technically be the end of affirmative action. So we all knew that it was coming to an end, so no one should be really really surprised by this. And yet, if you look fast forward, 20 years later from 2003, nothing has really changed in terms of the discriminatory practices. Now, I'll tell you, and as Americans have become extremely race-focused in our country. I think today is a historical ruling and a historical day to start to make us more race-neutral and really lead the way to stop looking at the color of our skin and start looking at our academic merits.
All right, let's get in the last voice from a youth on the show. We have Raj Bhutoria, who's also with us. And Raj, tell us what the student community thinks about this. As you just heard, that some voices say that people should be rewarded for their academics, for their merits, and not on the basis of the color of their skin. So what do you think about this, and how do you think the student community is receiving this?
Absolutely. First, I'd like to respond to some of my fellow panelists by citing two statistics. The first one is that 60% of Indo-Americans actually are in support of affirmative action. So there is a vocal majority here within the United States of Indian Americans who are supposedly affected by this policy who are yet in support of it. Second, one of the colleges named in this act is Harvard University. A study was published recently in April 2023 from Harvard University's admission statistics that stated that Asian Americans' admissions into Harvard University reached its highest level ever, while Black and Hispanic admissions fell. And this was while affirmative action was in place. So you can only imagine how this is removing protections for disadvantaged communities at a time when admissions are already falling. So within the student community, affirmative action is an incredible force that's allowed universities to combat systemic racism and generations of inequality. There are millions of families out there whose parents did not get the opportunity to go to college, who grew up with poor financial means and go to high schools that are underfunded, who yet have to compete with students from privileged backgrounds to achieve the same things. The fundamental goal of affirmative action and all related policies was to create a level playing field. That means a student who comes to the admissions office, who has the same qualifications and has achieved the same things as another student, but has faced incredible hardship, should be granted admission over the other student because they have had to dig themselves out of a much larger hole. With the loss of affirmative action, this means that diversity within colleges and across the United States are going to be hurt. That means economic opportunity will not be offered equally. As you mentioned, and a few other folks have mentioned, President Donald Trump said this will allow students to receive, with extraordinary merit, to receive admission. Now, there is talent, creativity, and hard work across the United States. However, opportunity and access to opportunity in the American dream is not equal. And that was the fundamental goal of affirmative action. Now, one thing I will agree with my other panelists is that affirmative action was never meant to be a permanent solution. It was always meant to be a Band-Aid fix to a real American problem, which is generational inequality and systemic racism. Affirmative action was just meant to create a fix on a larger issue that should have been solved in the last several decades, but it hasn't. And for that reason, the removal of affirmative action is premature, and it will cause more harm than good. Because, for example, legacy admissions, which primarily help white students who come from families whose parents have previously gone to college, will still be able to attend these colleges under legacy admission standards. And that hurts all minorities, Indian Americans included. Now, I think the path forward here is that colleges need to take financial means, the funding of high schools, as well as the racial makeup of zip codes into account. So what this will mean is college admissions and universities will still take race indirectly into account, but will only further the black box of college admissions. So overall, I think this policy is a net loss for the United States, and I think this is a sad day in American history.
Right, very divided as far as reactions coming out of that ruling. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
And as we've heard, Divya, that while we aim to be gender neutral, we have to face it that we're not gender neutral just yet, even if we consider the most developed countries like the United States. So the first aim has to be to create a level playing field. Well, we'll continue our focus on this very big story throughout the day, but for now, a short break.
Well, we're slipping into a short break. News and updates will continue on the other side. But in the meantime, you can check out our NDTV app for the latest news. And if you haven't already, download the app now.
Let's focus on Manipur now. 3 people have been killed in the last 24 hours in fresh violence, according to army sources. And this is extremely concerning, Divya, because just a few days ago, the Chief Minister had said that since June 13th, there have been no casualties, no deaths due to violence in the northeastern state. But now there are deaths, 3 deaths that have been reported in just the last 24 hours. The Chief Minister has held several rounds of meetings till late last night after fresh violence erupted in the state capital, Imphal. Security forces even used tear gas to disperse a crowd that had blocked the route that leads to the Chief Minister's house and the Raj Bhavan.
That's right, Priyanshi. The crowd had assembled to pay floral tribute to a former merchant Navy officer who had been killed earlier in the day and in a gunfight in the district of Kangpokpi. And meanwhile, it's day 2 of Rahul Gandhi's visit to the violence-hit state. And yesterday, Rahul Gandhi had visited the epicenter of the violence.
As women protesters surround his convoy with police around the place, senior Congress leaders trying to convince the people. At the same time, there are other supporters of Rahul Gandhi as well, some slogans of Rahul Gandhi Zindabad as well. But of course, quite a tense situation. There's a lot of security here at this point, as Rahul Gandhi's convoy is now turning back and heading back to Imphal.
High drama on day 1 of Congress leader Rahul Gandhi's visit to Manipur. As the state police stopped him from travelling by road to Churachandpur, the epicenter of ethnic violence in the state that has taken over 120 lives so far since May. Mr. Gandhi tweeted this video saying it was unfortunate the government was stopping him despite people from all communities welcoming him. The police claimed Mr. Gandhi's convoy was stopped at Bishnupur, 20 kilometers from Imphal, over security concerns. This led to a flare-up between the police and Congress supporters who were angry at the cops for stopping Mr. Gandhi.
Because we are Indian, he is too an Indian. Why we are killing among ourselves?
Possibility of blasting the grenades along the highway which a VIP is going to move today, chances cannot be ruled out. Chances are high because miscreants on both sides want to highlight whatever grievances they have by attacking the VIP, especially when Rahulji figure from the Delhi has come down here along with the local MLAs. We are simply trying to provide security, safety.
ये पोलिटिकलाइज कर रहा है। वो जो मैं सुना है कि ये चीफ मिनिस्टर और एसपी कन्वर्सेशन मणिपुर में बात किया है, वो जो चीफ मिनिस्टर का इंस्ट्रक्शन आ रहा है ब्लॉक करने का, वो है चल रहा है। हाँ क्या है तो अब कोई प्रॉब्लम है, वो जो प्रॉब्लम होने से तो ऑर्डर दीजिए, ऑर्डर भी नहीं दे रहा है, बोल रहा है वो जो सिचुएशन आसान नहीं है, खाली सिर्फ लॉ एंड ऑर्डर आसान नहीं है बोल रहा है।
There are claims and counterclaims about the incident in Bishnupur where his convoy was stopped, who stopped his convoy and why. Women protesters have come on record and said that he does not want, that they did not want him to be stopped and that they wanted him to come to Churachandpur. And the police claimed there were women protesters and they advised him to go back to Imphal and come by helicopter. Now, of course, Mr. Rahul Gandhi went back and went to Imphal back, and then of course he came by helicopter here.
Rahul Gandhi eventually did make it to Churachandpur, but a second location on his schedule, Moirang, was cancelled. The situation in Manipur has led to a slanging match between the BJP and the opposition, in particular the Congress. The BJP says the Manipur government and the centre are doing their best to solve the current ethnic tension, and that the opposition is making unwarranted allegations on a sensitive issue. The opposition says the government response so far has been incompetent. With Saurav Gupta and GD Shankar, Bureau Report, NDTV.
So today, Rahul Gandhi is set to visit Moirang as ethnic violence is continuing in Manipur for close to 2 months now. But moving on to the other big story from Tamil Nadu now, the governor R.N. Ravi has taken back a contentious order, which was the first of its kind in recent memory, that announced the dismissal of Minister V. Senthil Balaji from the Council of Ministers without consulting Chief Minister M.K. Stalin, escalating the bitter standoff between the governor and the DMK government.
Well, the Tamil Nadu Chief Minister M.K. Stalin has called for a meeting of senior leaders as well as legal experts, which is going to take place this morning. A strong worded letter will be sent to the governor, is what sources are saying post that meeting. Mr. Balaji, who was arrested 2 weeks ago and is in jail amid criminal proceedings in an alleged cash for job scandal, had been retained as a minister without portfolio by Mr. Stalin, a decision that the governor had decided to unilaterally override.
And that is, the governor actually took a U-turn on his decision late last evening, and he said that he will be consulting the Attorney General. And for now, that decision has been put on hold, which means that the arrested minister, Senthil Balaji, continues to be a minister without portfolio, as the governor's decision has been put on hold. But today, Divya, is going to be crucial because yesterday, the DMK actually decided to go to the Supreme Court challenging this move by the governor. But now that we have seen that the governor has actually taken back his order, we'll wait to see what the DMK actually does, considering that the governor is not going ahead with his order and he's saying he's going to be consulting his Attorney General. But there's going to be
the Chief Minister is also holding that meeting, Priyanshi, and that's going to be taking place just 2 hours from now, where he will be consulting legal experts as well as senior leaders during that meeting that will be taking place, chaired by the Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu, M.K. Stalin. A strong worded letter is what they were saying would be sent to the governor, but now that the governor has taken back his decision, so we will wait to see what really unfolds from there on.
Absolutely, and this was completely unprecedented, if I might add, that there has never been a case in recent memory of a governor dismissing a minister from the Council of Ministers without the advice of the Chief Minister. And in this case, Divya, as we know, that Senthil Balaji was arrested by the Enforcement Directorate 2 weeks ago in a cash for job scandal. So on allegations of money laundering, he was arrested. So the governor had said yesterday in a letter around 7:30, we got that letter, and at that time the governor had said in his letter that he can't be a minister because he's facing these serious allegations, and him being a minister could impact the investigation into this money laundering case. And then we saw that within just 2 hours of that letter, the governor actually sent out a second letter, according to sources, in which he took back his decision. My colleague Sam Daniel is joining us from Chennai now. And Sam, the governor has taken back his decision, but despite that, the DMK plans to go all guns blazing, with the meeting coming up at 10:30 a.m.
That's right, Priyanshi and Divya. The ruling DMK plans to take it to the Supreme Court. The Chief Minister saying that the governor has no powers to drop a minister from his cabinet unilaterally. It's only on the advice of the Chief Minister a governor can induct or remove a member from the cabinet. And in fact, this tussle began soon after the Supreme Court earlier this month had paved way for continuation of investigation against Senthil Balaji, who at that time was only facing allegations, not arrested. At that time, the governor had written to the Chief Minister asking him to be dropped, but Stalin shot back, saying that there are even central ministers now, and they have been in the past as well, with criminal allegations, and he should write to the Prime Minister or the BJP to drop those ministers. And his letter, again, after the arrest, suggesting he has to drop, again, that was not well received. Chief Minister M.K. Stalin chose to retain Balaji as a minister without portfolios and even passed a government order to that effect. It's in that context yesterday's letter and then withdrawal gains significance. The DMK says it's looking at this issue at two different levels. Constitutionally, they say there's no way, nowhere it says that anyone facing criminal allegations or corruption allegations ought to be dropped from the cabinet. Only after conviction that motion will fall into place and a person will be removed and will not be allowed to contest for 6 years if the conviction is beyond 2 years. And they say this governor acting in a politically partisan way, aiding the BJP in the state, which has a very negligible presence in the state, to build a corruption narrative against the ruling DMK ahead of the 2024 elections. And they say in that context, it will be suicidal on their part to fall into that trap. And that's why they say on the question of moral grounds, removing Balaji from the cabinet will not work. And they would not do that because they say this kind of a thing could follow against a few other ministers as well, and that will dent their moral courage or their morality before elections, and that will be damaging the DMK's prospect. That's why they want to convey a message that the leadership, the party's leadership, is strongly backing these ministers when they face allegations. They are confident that it will not stand legal scrutiny, but they do not want to fall into that pressure, fall into that particular narrative of the governor. The Rajbhavan, of course, denies allegations. But many also point out that despite Supreme Court recently ruling that the governors ought to abide by the Council of Ministers, this is one governor, many say, doesn't indicate that he is keen to follow those guidelines seriously. Lastly, this is one among the many such face-offs in the recent past, began with the governor delaying the bill seeking exemption from NEET for Tamil Nadu after the assembly passed. At least 17 bills are still pending with the governor seeking his assent. And the last one was the governor walking out of the Tamil Nadu assembly, not reading the official version but skipping certain parts, including not referring to names of leaders like Ambedkar, Periyar, Kamarajar and Karunanidhi.
Sam, thanks very much for joining us. As Sam pointed out, this is an escalation of the existing tensions between the DMK government and the governor.
That's right, and that crucial meeting that's coming up this morning. So we will keep tracking that story and going back to Sam. For now, we're stepping into a very short break. Get your top story. And the Supreme Court on Thursday struck down on race now being a criteria as far as college admissions are concerned, declaring that race cannot be a factor and forcing institutions of higher education to look for new ways to achieve diverse student bodies.
And Divya, this comes as a major blow to this decades-old practice that boosted educational opportunities for African Americans and other minorities, including Indian Americans as well. The court's conservative majority overturned admissions plans at Harvard and University of North Carolina, which are the nation's oldest private and public colleges as well. Now, what is the reason for this? The Chief Justice John Roberts wrote in the majority opinion that while affirmative action was quote-unquote well-intended and implemented in good faith, it cannot last forever and it amounted to unconstitutional discrimination against others. He said that the student must be treated based on his or her experiences as an individual and not on the basis of race.
Well, the former president of the United States, Donald Trump, the current presidential frontrunner, has taken to social media in order to talk about this landmark decision which has taken place, calling it a great day for America. Now, people with extraordinary ability and everything else necessary for success, including a future greatness for our country, are finally being rewarded, is what Donald Trump said. However, well, Barack Obama, as well as Joe Biden, do not agree with, what Trump is, in fact, saying, and also this landmark ruling.
Absolutely. The current Biden administration is against this, and President Joe Biden said that we are strongly against this ruling from the Supreme Court. Now, to get an understanding and a perspective on the Supreme Court order that is truly landmark, we have Asma Nomani joining us, who's an American author and a former Georgetown University professor. We also have Sushanta Datta, who's the co-founder Coalition for TJ and the director of education platform at American Hindu Coalition. Thanks very much, Suparna, for joining us. And my first question to you, that as we've just seen that President Joe Biden and even former President Barack Obama, they put out their reactions saying that this will majorly impact the representation of minorities in US universities. What is your take on that?
Good morning. Thanks for having me. Well, it's surprising and at the same time not very surprising. You know, immigrants like me have made America their home because they come here recognizing America as a land of meritocracy, which rewards hard work, merit, and grit and dedication. And so to come here and find out that there is affirmative action is a setback, because, you know, if you're to uphold the Constitution of the United States, it has to be equal treatment under the law, with equal protection. And as the co-founder of Coalition for TJ, I can tell you over the last 3 years in our journey to get justice and equal opportunity in education for K through 12, which is in school age kids, what we have found is that while we've reached across the aisles the last 3 years to talk to leaders from both sides of the aisle, Democrats and Republicans, we have only got a fair hearing from one side of the aisle, the Republicans. It seems to be that the Republicans understand that merit and grit and hard work is not only good because it's fair to the child, but it's also good for America because it puts the applicants or the students who are able to cope with rigorous and challenging work, good for national security of the country.
Right. Suparna, not every college or university in the United States was using a race as a criterion for admission. Some states, including California, Michigan, as well as Florida, so 9 states in all, would already banned this ruling earlier on as well.
It's very interesting, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because while they were not checking the boxes on the race, but there are much more insidious so-called race-neutral ways where you could use zip codes or you could use other ways, to give a leg up to some applicants versus others. So yes, this is just the first battle. It's not the last battle that we fought. There are many more, battles up ahead, such as for the Coalition for TJ, which we're hoping this year can be accepted by the Supreme Court of the United States.
And Suparna, let me ask you this, that you just talked about how you also have an Indian origin. So let's talk about Indian Americans specifically and students who aspire to go to the United States for their higher studies. So according to a Pew survey, close to 60% of Indians in the United States support affirmative action, and they say that it helps for the representation of diversities in United States universities. While on the other side, some say that it only prefers African Americans, while Indian Americans don't really benefit. So what does this mean for Indian Americans really?
I'm not sure, because I have seen different polls the last couple of days, and it seems to me the majority, the latest polls that I saw, I'm not familiar with the Pew poll that you just mentioned, the majority seem to think that, race-based opportunity is not the right thing to do. It violates the Constitution of the United States. It's not right to the person to say that, okay, you worked hard enough, you've proven you can do it, but you're just not the right ethnicity or not the right color. I'm sorry, we just have to give it to somebody else.
But one counterpoint is this, that while, of course, we aim to be gender neutral as a world, and all countries aim to be gender neutral, but we have to face that we are not gender neutral currently, and I beg your pardon, we are not race neutral currently, and we cannot ignore the fact that not all ethnicities and races have a similar level playing field. They don't have the same start point, they don't have the same privileges to begin with. That's what Michelle Obama also spoke about. So how can they be judged on the same parameters when they don't start with the same point?
Well, it's interesting. Michelle Obama, only after her husband, Barack Obama, was nominated for the as a Democrat nominee, did she say that she was proud to be an American. She and her husband both grew up in very privileged homes. They had got good good education. They grew up with money, yet they consider themselves as minorities. it's unfortunate that there are people who use race as a cudgel, who you know, some would say are race mongers. It's interesting that they would continue to say something like that. From what my experience is that most Indian Americans do consider affirmative action not the right or the fair thing to do.
Right. You know, some institutions might now seek other ways in order to make their student population more diverse. You know, if you could take us through some other steps that could be taken in that direction.
Right. And so here's the thing, that we all have diverse points of views, diverse opinions, and diversity should not just be about your race or where you are in life. For example, I grew up in a very humble home in India. My father escaped religious persecution. He was a refugee in India, and he grew up penniless, but he pulled himself out of poverty. How? With the power of education and by his grit and determination. When I came to this country, I borrowed a few dollars from my dad to come here. And because I thought that, as he said, and my mother always said, that education can open pathways like nothing else can. And so I don't wear my life's journey and my experiences on my sleeves. And I think that I don't expect a handout. I think that most Indians in this country don't expect handouts. They want to make their way through their hard work.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sushanta Datta, for joining us on the broadcast. With that, we're slipping into a very short break.
But you can keep tracking the latest news on the NDTV app that's available on both iOS and Android.
Now, just 2 days after Prime Minister Narendra Modi made a strong pitch for a uniform civil code, Uttarakhand's Chief Minister has said that such a law will be implemented in the state soon enough.
Well, the Chief Minister, Mr. Dhami, has spoken on UCC on several occasions, and the state had even set up a committee that was headed by the former Supreme Court Judge Justice Ranjan Prakash Desai last year to examine ways to implement it. So clearly, Uttarakhand leading the way to make Uniform Civil Code a reality. The Uttarakhand UCC committee is set to address the media today, and the panel is likely to submit a draft or a report, a draft law on UCC by today. So the Uttarakhand panel will also submit a draft very soon, and that could lead the way to making Uniform Civil Code a reality.
Moving on now to the United States, and the Supreme Court there has struck down the affirmative action in college admissions, declaring race cannot no longer be a factor of forcing the institutes of higher education to look for new ways in order to achieve diverse student bodies. This comes as a major blow to the decades-old practice that boosted educational opportunities for African Americans as well as other minorities. Well, to get more on this, we have Asra Numani joining us, an American author and former Georgetown University professor. We also have with us Raj Bhutoria, youth political advocate, with us this morning. Thank you so much for joining us. Let me take my first question to Asra Numani. Many reactions coming into this ruling, from President Biden to the Obama slamming this ruling to Donald Trump agreeing with this judgment. What is your reaction, and how surprising has this ruling been for you?
Well, I am so happy about this ruling because, you know, I arrived in this nation from India at the age of 4 with my parents here, settled in this nation, having chosen America because we have this little document called the U.S. Constitution. And in this Constitution is an amendment called the 14th Amendment that guarantees equal protection under the law. What I have been so sad to see over recent years is that there is a new discrimination against minority group, and that minority group is Asian Americans, and many of them are from India. And so today's ruling is such a significant victory for all of us who fight for equality.
Right. We also have Raj Bhatoria with us. Raj, being an Indian American, what are your views on this, and how do you think this will impact the Indian American students going forward?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me back. So, as I said before, 60% of Indo-Americans and the majority of Asian Americans support affirmative action. And I think a big part of that reason is because affirmative action primarily helps disadvantaged communities. Now, with the reversal of affirmative action, there has been no action on legacy admissions. Legacy admissions is the practice of letting a student whose parents attend the same college and allow them to have preferential treatment in admissions. Now, Harvard was one of the universities named in this lawsuit. In the class of 2022, 36% of Harvard's admits were legacy admissions, the primarily white students. So this is fundamentally helping students whose parents have the ability to go to college. And this hurts Indo-Americans. I mean, the majority of Indo-Americans, like myself, were the first in their family to go to an American college. We don't have those same advantages, or our parents had the opportunity to attend an American college. So with the reversal of affirmative action in 1996 in California, the attendance of Black, Hispanic, and other disadvantaged communities fell 60%. But at the same time, legacy admissions continued, composing almost over a third of all colleges. So this means colleges will become less diverse. They will favor those who have money and whose parents have attended that college previously, and will overall hurt the American educational system, but also the American dream, which allows people to achieve great things in the United States, even though they don't come from privileged backgrounds. And education is the #1 way which students can achieve their dreams.
Right. Now, Asra, if you could come in, colleges and universities will now have to consider other factors in order to increase diversity on their campus. What steps can be taken in that direction?
Well, I'm a leader of an organization called Coalition for TJ. It's a high school in Northern Virginia. And in 2020, the school board removed merit admissions tests because they decided that there were too many Asian students, including Indo-Americans, as the other guests just described us. Well, what has happened is that the number of Asian students has dropped significantly because merit, this very simple concept, is out the window. Now, what the universities will do now is use proxies, just like the school board did here in Fairfax County, Virginia. In Fairfax County, they say, ask students about their experience factors. They use proxies for race. And Harvard University has already indicated today that they are basically putting their middle finger in disrespect to the Supreme Court's decision, and that they will try to do anything they can to continue the practices that they have. It isn't enough to have a percentage of people who believe that a policy is okay by them. Most of the South believed that segregation was okay. And then Brown versus Board of Education ruled that equal protection under the law is a value that we must protect in the United States. But unfortunately, the Democratic Party in the 1950s had a massive resistance to integration. And right now, we can see from President Biden's messaging that he is going to have a massive resistance to equality under the law for Asian Americans, and we are going to continue to fight it. None of this gobbledygook about percentages here and there is going to override a simple fact that racism is unacceptable no matter what your excuse is for it. And so this is so important that we're going to keep fighting. We're going to be vigilant, and we're going to make sure that their sneaky tricks to continue their racism will not survive.
Right. Raj Bhatoria, let's just talk about how did colleges use affirmative action in admissions before? Were they preferring or giving preference to certain people of certain color or certain race or certain ethnic background, say, in comparison to the Asian community?
Yeah. So I'm glad that Asra mentioned segregation. Segregation is one of many things in American history that has disadvantaged certain communities. What does it mean for a community to be disadvantaged? That means they come from a high school that's underfunded. that means their families, their parents may not have gone to college because there were racist policies in place at the time. That means they may earn less money, but they still need to meet the admission criteria to attend a college. For example, Harvard. Every student, whether it be Black, Indian, or white, or any other race, who attends Harvard University meets a minimum criteria for academic achievement, which is an incredible hurdle at Harvard University. What affirmative action means and what will continue to, what colleges must take into account in a post-affirmative action world is that when an applicant comes and they're extremely qualified, but they faced incredible adversity, which means they came from a family that faced poverty, or they came from a high school that didn't have the proper funding for test prep or schooling, it means they should be giving a preference if they meet all the same academic criteria as a student who grew up in a privileged background.
Right.
So this means these are academic equals who are then being presented, and you have to make a choice between the two. Well, one had to climb out of a much larger hole in a much more tough circumstance than the other to reach that point. And so I think for that reason...
And what has unfortunately happened is that it is the color of the skin that has been used to identify the adversity that a student faces. And that's not a fair barometer, and it is not legal either. It's unconstitutional. And that's why it's such a victory.
Well, the color of the skin should not be a reason to get admission into college, but should not also be a reason to exclude someone from getting admission into a college. Well, 9 states, including California as well as Florida, had already banned race as a factor in admissions to public universities. And now this is going to be a blanket ruling as far as universities in the United States are concerned. Thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast. With that, we're slipping into a very short break. Well, we will continue with our news and updates on the other side. But in the meantime, you can check out our NDTV app for the latest news. If you haven't already, download the app now.